Now this is some videos of what we do. And again, I'm blessed to be able to measure some of this stuff, but I know that when all is said and done and I'm no longer where I'm at, and I go somewhere and retire in a small college, I'm not going to have this. So I'm using it now. So the reason you monitor, number one, is there's some evidence that overtraining syndrome is athlete-specific. That how you display overtraining is not the same as how they display overtraining. So we've got to find out how this athlete shows us these symptoms. Okay? So that's number one, why we monitor. Number two, it actually can help us in performance. Like I said, we can figure out when an athlete's really ready to compete. When they are competing, and they're competing really well, what are those markers showing us? Why are they so good? You know, so then we know where to take them to next year. Number three, talent identification. You can bring a bunch of people into a room, you can test them, see who matches the people you have, and that's the ones you develop. You know, everybody knows the difference between a donkey and a racehorse. If you don't know the difference, the testing will help you find the difference. You know, because donkeys are great. I personally don't want to put my career on training a donkey. And so I'm probably going to test the athletes, and if you're a donkey, I'm going to send you to like marching band or somewhere in the stable. You plow the field so we have food to eat. Right? All right. When it comes to testing, there's a few things that you need to make sure that you do. Number one, the tests need to be able to give you information on the sport. So you need to be able to relate the results to the sport. Because that's a hard sell. If you're just measuring stuff to measure it, you're wasting your time and the athlete's time. Number two, the data has to be valid and reliable. And we'll talk about that in just a second. A big thing is you've got to make sure that testing doesn't interfere with training. When we test, we actually count it as part of training. It's actually, that is volume. And that counts towards what they do at practice. Because it's active, it's dynamic training. It requires them to go to a maximum. If you can, use tests that are field-based, meaning that take part within that practice. That puts them in the setting that they're comfortable with. Because we all know, like we said, with VO2 max testing, with sprint testing, that stuff happens in a lab, and it doesn't feel normal to the athlete. When the athlete is in their environment, they're going to give you numbers that are more true, because they feel comfortable, they feel normal. So when I talked about validity and reliability, a test is valid when it measures what it intends to measure. I want to measure upper body strength. So I'm going to do jumping jacks in 1 minute. Is that valid or not valid? So I want to measure upper body strength, but I'm going to do this and see how many I can do in a minute. Not valid. All right? So a push-up or maybe a 1 rep max on bench press would be closer to being valid for what I want to measure. Reliable is that the test is repeatable, that you have instructions to follow, that you have rules to follow, so that if something happens to you, your assistant or the next coach can follow that same test to a T to get the same results. Because if you do something and you don't write down how to do it, and then they go, okay, well maybe they did it this way. So that would be like with reliability, that's why we measure bar height, and we measure knee angle, we measure hip angle, and we measure ankle angle. We get all those so we can put the athletes in the same exact position to perform this pull. Because I don't want to be able, it's no longer reliable if I go in there and put them in this position and they pull, but then the next week somebody else does the test and they're in this position to pull. It's a different test completely. We cannot compare the data. So I want to make sure they're improving or getting worse, so I have to be able to replicate. So that's where you have to have guidelines. Regardless of what the test is, make sure that you are doing things the same way. Now in my lab, which is actually the weight room, it's actually one big room, we test different modalities of strength, jumping, psychological status, metrics, morphology, meaning body composition, arm length, bone girth, etc., hydration, aerobic capacity, and in the field, as you see here, speed, agility, jumping, throwing, and then tactical. And then out of those different methods, we collect those variables. Like I said, strength, how fast you gather your strength, impulse, which is kind of a measure of strength, it's the area under the force curve, power, profile of mood states, sprint-based variables as well, ground contact time, velocity. So this is a slalom kayak athlete. So this is an isometric pull, and what he's doing here is he's going to pull the bar, but there's not going to be any movement, as fast as he can. So we're going to test upper body strength. So that's something that we do. You could also do that for swimmers. You can do it for any type of athlete. You can do this. One thing about the test I'm going to show you, the mid-thigh pull, is that there is a relationship between isometric strength, or strength where you don't move, and dynamic strength. They are agreeable. So if you have someone in the lab who produces high rates of isometric strength, where they can't move an object, but they can push against it really well, they will also display strength in a dynamic means, actually in the lift itself. This is a force curve. What we look at is force produced in the first 30 milliseconds. That would be your starting strength. Peak rate of force is kind of the spike, how fast it goes up. Peak force is the top of the curve before it stops going down. Like I said, impulse is this area. So you can either have a big spike with more area here, or you can have a long, drawn-out curve. So there's different ways of interpreting that impulse. Now, like I said, around the world, there's probably been 25 different studies done on isometric strength testing, and it's typically like a bench press, a squat, where they squat up against an immovable bar. We do the pull, and there's also the row. In all the different types of testing, this has been confirmed over and over again that this is a sound predictor of abilities, and also predicting who is going to be a good athlete. So we use it for a multitude of reasons. So again, we talked about technology and how we're integrating more technology into sport. And again, you're going to hear that in Colorado. This is some examples of what we do. Now, this is Steve Holcomb, current gold medalist in bobsled, current world champion. He's doing what we call the mid-thigh pull. The weightlifting coaches, he needs to be more aggressive in the hip extension. I know he's not a weightlifter. This was more early on. We took this video, we were teaching this lift, so you get to see actually what's going on. But you can see that he's got an upright torso, the bar is peak power position, knees ahead of the bar, feet flat so he can drive through his heels. And we're doing that not only to reinforce strength development, but it also familiarizes the athlete with the test itself. So, so he's extending, not a counter move. We're trying not to have a counter move. He's driving through his heels, working on extension, driving at the top. Again, not a perfect lift, but you get the picture. The next one now is the isometric mid-thigh pull. So that's where this is this contraption that we have. So it's a squat rack with a bar that we can move up and down again to the nearest millimeter. Force plates the athlete stands on. We take their hands in. They grab the bar, because we know that in weightlifting the weakest link is grip. That's why we lift weights and teach the hook grip. But not only do we have them hook grip the bar, but we take their hands onto the bar, so they can't even let go. Like they're stuck to the bar when they do this test. So we do three trials. They pull, rest 3 minutes, pull, rest 3 minutes, pull. And we take the mean, or the average of those three. So you're not going to see a lot of action in this, but you'll see some movement. So again, this gives us a force curve. They are told to pull as hard and as fast as they can. You see how she's pulling, pushing through the floor. So that's a maximal effort. And then she recovers. So that is how we collect this information. It's not pretty. I mean, it's just they pull as hard as they can. But that gives us this data. I mean, that's what I said. We get every millisecond for 3 to 4 seconds. And we can see exactly where they're at. Another thing that we do is we have the athletes jump, like I said, with a counter move, self-selected depth, and then a static jump from 90 degrees without a counter move. We go with body weight, 10 kilos, 20 kilos, 40 kilos, and then jump up to 60 kilos. We look at percent drop-off, meaning how low did you jump compared to your body weight. So if you can jump 32 centimeters with body weight, and then you jump 12 centimeters with 60 kilos, what was the percent drop? Can we minimize that? So that's the things that we look at. So that's a horse plate that she's standing on, so it measures flight time. It's absolute, it's perfect as far as the data it collects. So she sees the software, she gets to see the numbers immediately after she jumps. We record it all, put it in an Excel sheet. Like I said, we have our equipment in our weight room. Like, I don't like having a lab because a lab makes them feel like it's clinical. I just want them to test in the weight room because that's where they are. It's their home. So we put everything in the weight room, minus the ski treadmill and the metabolic cart for biathlon. So this is with a 10 kilogram bar, so 22 pounds. So again, she gets to select the depth at which she drops. That's key. So that makes the test reliable. Now, another test that we do is we use these things called OptiGates. So this stuff is crazy expensive. I don't know how we ended up with this. I didn't complain. We have 20 meters. I like telling you how much this costs just because it's funny to me. Because it's made of plastic and somebody's making a fortune. So this costs $50,000 for this. And to me, I feel like if anybody wants to go out there and put the same product out, you could probably charge $20,000 and you'd make a kill. Because this stuff is not worth $50 grand. It's very good in what it collects, but it's, like I'm saying, it's plastic. It is plastic. And like you can't step on it or it'll break. So we have our timing eyes out. And then what these are, each bar is a meter long. And it sends a signal out. So it emits a signal. And anything that gets in its way, it collects that data. So you can also put the video cameras with it so you can get slow motion analysis to kind of make sure you're seeing what the data shows you. So what you get out of this is we have the athlete sprint through, and it gets ground contact time, how long the foot's on the ground. It gets the angle of takeoff, so it tells me how high the ankle is to heel from the track when they take off. It gives me flight time, like was their next step, was it here or was it here? There's a big difference because if I'm accelerating, I want low hill recovery, and if I'm in top speed, I want high hill recovery. So I get stride length, I get acceleration, I get velocity of each step. I even get how long they spend on each step. So it tells me if they've got like a lazy leg or if their strength imbalances, like if they spend more time on their left than their right. So we can take that into their training program. So this, you can just see we have the athlete start at a given mark, and then they sprint in all the way through those sticks. So we do that 2 or 3 times. We also do body composition, and like I said, profile mood state is a paper we give them every day. They do it online to tell us where they're at mentally. Now here's kind of where we get into the real world. Like, what do you do when you can't have someone pay $50,000 for plastic? You know, this picture really tells you everything. Vertical jump testing. I mean, it is the best, really. It's free. You know, even if you need to take chalk on your hand and have your athlete jump against the wall. Okay. It's that simple. I mean, I'm telling you, if you can't afford chalk, there's mud. There's mud is all over this planet. Mud, good. You know, we can do it. Whatever it takes. Free. For the science to support that, there's been some studies done by Kramer and Fry, who looked at vertical jump in comparison to strength, 1 rep max in squat, power clean, and then also mid-thigh pull, the test I showed you just a minute ago. Vertical jump correlated very strongly to all those parameters. So you don't even have to test 1 rep max in the weight room anymore. You don't even have to test the sprinting. You don't have to test anything. 1 rep max, where their jump correlates to all that. It's going to show you if they're improving or not. Number 2, in some of their research, they took a football team, like a major football team, and they took all the athletes, did vertical jumps. Guess what they found? The starters on the American football team had higher vertical jumps than the people on the bench. So it broke down nicely, where if you're on the first team, if you're the wide receiver, you had a vertical jump higher than the second string wide receiver. Second string wide receiver had a higher vertical jump than the third string. And the coach did not choose the team this way, that's just how it played out. So the vertical jump works. I mean, you can predict who's going to fall where on the team. And they also looked at vertical jump compared, like, big-time college football athletes to small school college football, and found the same thing, that people at bigger schools have higher vertical jumps compared to people that play at small schools. At the end of the day, vertical jump testing is wonderful, and it's free. So I would recommend that you use it. Another thing that you could do is an agility test. So an agility test would be, maybe it's specific to your sport. So if you're a field-based team like soccer or football, maybe you could do a W test. So you literally make a W with the cones. You start here, back pedal, sprint, back pedal, sprint, or you can do lateral. So lateral here, forward, back pedal, and then lateral this way. Whatever you want to do, you can make it up. You make up the drill. You standardize it, and then you test. And so what we have here is the W test. An athlete tested in September and December. We found that they improved, they got faster, but you can see here is this athlete also got faster, but they got slower to the right side. So when they did the agility test to the right, they actually got slower, but to the left, they got faster. So that means that we need to go into training and see, is it a strength issue, is it an injury issue, or is it just they can't make the transition to go to the right as well as they do to the left. So when you test, these things that you do on the ground for free can give you the same data that I have in my fancy little lab. You don't need it. And that's the thing about I'm partial to athletics and track and field, because I always think that athletics has always been ahead of the curve. But I mean, you think about the fact that you can just do a time trial. You can take the shot and you can just do an underhand toss. So you can always have the measurements every 3 or 4 weeks. You can do the behind the head toss, off the board, the toe box, or you can do an underhand toss. And then see how they're improving. 14.2 meters. Okay, last day through 13.95. There's easy things you can do. And a lot of these tests come out of the world of track and field athletics. Like bounds, like there's 30-meter bounds. How many bounds can you get, or what you can do, like 5 bounds and see how much distance you cover within 5 bounds. And what you do is, instead of basing your results or your thoughts off some random pool of data that someone says this is good, this is bad, You take your own athletes, your own athletic population, and create your own database. You know what I'm saying? Because what works for some other country and these athletes probably not going to work for your athletes. So you compare your athletes with your own data. So you start from scratch. Again, final thoughts on this. Remember that your sport, your practice facility, your competition facility is your lab. You can collect all the data in the world that you want. No one's going to charge you for it, and you don't have to pay for it. You just have to be creative and willing to invest in athlete monitoring. Because I can tell you, the athlete who's prepared and recovered is the athlete that's going to win. You know, it doesn't have to be fancy. You don't need $1 million. You just need to be able to use your brain creatively. Look for those indicators. Look for those things that sometimes the athletes aren't even aware of. Look at body language. Get to know your athletes. You know, just really try to figure out what their body is telling you and make adjustments based on those. Don't be afraid of change. It's not bad that you have to change your training program based on something happening. It doesn't make you a bad coach. It makes you a good coach because you're willing to adapt. You know, and at the end of the day, that's important. And keep those records and base the training on those records. Don't just go off on a whim. Don't live in fantasy land. And again, here's some studies for further reading to help guide you. Let's see, it is now 10:35. We're 5 minutes late. So you want to say, come back. How long do y'all want? 10 minutes, 15 minutes? What do you want? 15?
15's a nap.
Do what?
15's a nap.
A nap? All right, turn the lights off. Everybody